He told me I was too expensive. So I decided to make sure he understood the true cost of my departure. But the axe wasn't aimed at my meager severance package. It was aimed squarely at his entire digital empire. The fluorescent lights in the office hummed this particular Tuesday morning like a trapped, frustrated wasp. It wasn't a pleasant sound, but it was the sound of my entire tenure at Stellar Solutions, a low, steady, irritating buzz that had been the soundtrack to my accomplishments and my growing, bitter irritation. For 7 years I had been the quiet engine of their digital operations, while the suits in the executive suites debated quarterly projections. Fueled by overpriced coffee, I was the one making sure the gears didn't grind to a halt. I kept the servers humming, the databases syncing, the client portals open and functional. I was the invisible scaffolding holding up the shiny facade of success. Mark, my direct manager, was supposed to be my champion. He was the kind of boss who would nod thoughtfully while you spoke, asking just enough probing questions to make you feel both scrutinized and valued. He remembered the time I personally fixed the catastrophic server crash during the Q3 launch, the one that had nearly shredded our reputation. He called it heroic dedication. I called it a basic job function, but I let him keep the compliment, swallowing the retort with practiced grace. For a long time that praise felt like a lifeline, a necessary anchor against the rising tide of corporate indifference. That tide, though, had started subtly. First, the meetings got shorter. Then, the budget for my team started shrinking, not with a strategic rationale, but with a vague, ominous mantra: optimization. Optimization. It sounded beautiful, like a perfectly choreographed ballet. But I knew what it really meant. It meant cuts. It meant someone, somewhere, was preparing to clip the wings of the most indispensable people. The official memo arrived on a Friday afternoon, tucked into an email chain titled Synergistic Efficiencies Initiative. I read it 3 times, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. Key phrases flashed: right-sizing, streamlining overhead, realigning human capital. It was corporate speak, designed to sound elegant while simultaneously delivering a gut punch. Then came the one-on-one with Mark. His usual thoughtful nod was replaced by a taut, forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and began. "Listen, Alex," he started, using my name with a strange formality, as if we were strangers crossing a busy sidewalk. "You're fantastic. Seriously. You are, without question, one of the best technical minds we have." The praise. It was a bribe, a softening agent before the blow. I felt a surge of warmth, followed immediately by a cold knot of apprehension forming in my stomach. I braced myself. "But," he continued, the pause stretching out like taffy, "as you know, we're in a period of intense cost-cutting. We have to make tough decisions about where to allocate resources. And frankly, while your output is stellar, the specialized nature of your role means your salary has become significantly weighted in the overall structure." The word significantly weighted felt like tiny, sharp pebbles dropping into my already turbulent internal pool. Weighted, meaning expensive, meaning necessary, but expensive enough to be a target. "We're looking to flatten the structure," he explained, gesturing vaguely at the room, at the wall, at the entire enterprise. "We're looking for efficiencies across the board. And Alex, your role, while technically essential, is on the chopping block." The air seemed to evacuate the room. The fluorescent hums suddenly sounded deafening, like 1,000 angry bees buzzing directly in my ear canal. "So, what are you saying?" I managed, my voice surprisingly steady, though internally I felt like 1,000 tiny alarm bells had simultaneously gone off. Mark finally dropped the facade of casual confidence. His posture straightened, his smile vanished, and his eyes, those deceptively kind eyes, became utterly flat, judgmental. "We're saying that, Al, effective 2 weeks from today, your position will be eliminated. It's not a performance issue. It's a structural one. You are being laid off. Lay off." The phrase hung there, heavy and suffocating. Not a transition, not a sabbatical, just gone. 6 years of nights spent debugging, of weekends spent patching vulnerabilities, of the pride in seeing a complex system function flawlessly. All reduced to a spreadsheet line item marked, red, excessive cost. The rage, which had been a slow, simmering heat beneath my skin, suddenly boiled over. It wasn't a shout-worthy, messy, tearful rage, though those were certainly present. It was cold, focused, crystalline rage. The kind that settles in your bones and tells you, definitively, that everything is wrong, and that the error is not in the system, but in the man who controls the master key. "So, because I'm too expensive?" I asked. And the simplicity of the question felt like a seismic event. Mark shifted uncomfortably, running a hand over his jaw. "It's not you, Alex. It's the portfolio. You are a massive asset, but the portfolio needs to be leaner. You're a necessary expense we can no longer justify in our current economic climate." The injustice of it was a physical pain. He hadn't seen the hours, the late-night caffeine-fueled sprints, the intricate knowledge base I represented. He saw a line on a bottom line. He saw a number. He saw a cost to be pruned. "And what about the cost of not having me?" I countered, leaning forward slightly, reclaiming the conversational space he had stolen. "Who else understands the custom configurations of the Meridian database? Who has the root access to the legacy client portals? Who, Mark, does the entire damn infrastructure of Stellar Solutions run on?" He waved a dismissive hand, the gesture infuriatingly condescending. "We have redundancies. We have teams. We can retrain someone. We'll onboard a junior specialist. And we'll bring them up to speed." "Redundancies," I echoed, the word tasting like bile. A nice word. A very expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately fragile word. He finally started the handover process, pulling out a clean, white folder. "Here is the severance package details. 2 months' salary, COBRA coverage, outplacement assistance, standard procedure. We want this to be amicable, Alex. We want you to leave feeling valued." Valued. The word felt hollow, a pathetic puff of air escaping a punctured tire. I took the folder, my fingers tracing the crisp edges. The physical proof of my dismissal, the token gesture of respect. I nodded, giving him the slight, controlled nod of acceptance that usually precedes a massive internal explosion. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice low, steady, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I appreciate the efficiency." He visibly relaxed, the tension easing from his shoulders. He picked up his glass of water, a smug, triumphant little smirk playing on his lips. He had won. He had pruned the unwanted, overly costly branch. The cost-cutting initiative had succeeded. He could now parade his victory around the conference room. "Great. Let's get the HR paperwork signed," he said, pushing the pen toward me. "We'll schedule your final exit interview for tomorrow. You'll feel much better once this is behind you, Alex." I looked at the pen, then up at his face. The smirk was wider now, brighter. He thought he had achieved closure. He thought he had contained the raging, defeated employee within the boundaries of the severance package. But in that moment, holding the folder of my ruined career, the simmering rage finally ceased its boil and transformed into something infinitely more dangerous. Cold, calculating, methodical vengeance. The irony of the situation, the absolute, magnificent cruelty of it, hit me with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't just cut costs, he had cut the lifeline. He hadn't just fired the employee, he had evicted the operational brain. And the access keys, the ultimate, glorious keys, were still in my digital pocket. "Before we do that," I said, picking up the pen but not signing. My gaze remained fixed on his face, enjoying the small, pleased flicker in his eyes. "There are a few things I need to handle." Mark paused, tilting his head, a flicker of curiosity replacing his smug certainty. "Oh, anything else? A final system check?" "No. Nothing for you to handle," I corrected him smoothly. "Something for the infrastructure. Just a final optimization before the handover." I walked past his desk, toward the small, dedicated workstation tucked into the corner of his office. My finger moved across the keyboard, swift and practiced. The main portal was already open, displaying the sprawling, interconnected map of our cloud environment, Azure, Oz, proprietary microservices, all humming beneath a single, beautiful dashboard. Mark watched, mildly bored, waiting for me to confirm that everything was, indeed, pristine. My cursor hovered over the admin console drop-down. I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink it. I didn't want a subtle warning flag or a slow, creeping failure. I wanted a theatrical collapse. I wanted a moment of pure, unadulterated, "What did you just do?" panic. With a single, decisive click, I initiated the Global Access Revocation Protocol. The screen didn't flicker. It didn't flash a warning. It simply reset. The dashboard, which had been a vibrant tapestry of green and blue, instantly turned to a stark, alarming landscape of orange and pulsing red. The status indicators for the Meridian database, the client portal API, the main billing system, all of them blinked, then solidified into a flat, uncompromising, bright crimson. The system was screaming in silence. Mark's casual posture went rigid. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost alarming. The slight, knowing smirk vanished, replaced by a look of utter, gaping disbelief. What did you do?" he whispered, the sound barely audible over the sudden, frantic whine of the office cooling unit. "I executed a full termination of all core root access permissions," I explained, keeping my voice level, almost conversational. "Effective immediately. And I did it at the highest level, Mark, across all domains. Read-write, administrative, global, the keys are gone." He snatched his own tablet from his desk, his fingers flying across the screen, attempting to pull up the system status himself. The tablet, which had been his constant companion, suddenly displayed the same horrifying, crimson-splashed interface as my monitor. "Wait," he stammered, tapping furiously. "The billing. The client data. How is it supposed to report to the quarterly review if the API connection is severed? The migration plan relies on the old server cluster being fed directly by the Meridian instance. You just cut the feed." I leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing my arms. The energy that had been running through me before, the desperate anxiety, the resentment, the fury, was now coalescing into a deep, satisfying, bone-deep calm. The feed was, quite frankly, the most critical part of the operation. "Mark," I confirmed, allowing a small, slow smile to spread across my face. "Your redundancies are lovely, but they are still just shells without the primary access. Think of it like this: you fired the chef, but you left the kitchen open with all the expensive appliances still running. But you revoked the chef's access to the ingredients, the power supply, and the master security code." He looked at the screen, then back at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and dawning, terrible comprehension. The thought of the massive, interconnected catastrophe, the client uproar, the revenue loss, the panicked scrambles of the junior staff he had promised to train, was finally hitting him. He was staring into the face of a 7-year-old mistake, only now, The mistake was costing Stellar Solutions $500,000 a month. But how did you do it so fast? The permissions matrix is huge. That requires... No, I interrupted him, shaking my head slightly. It requires knowing where the master kill switch is. And having a genuine disdain for the notion of your perceived efficiency. He sputtered, searching for the right, impressive corporate term to describe the act. A surgical execution. A hostile takeover of our own infrastructure. You have functionally paralyzed the entire enterprise. Paralyzed is a generous term, I corrected him, feeling the exhilaration bubble up like champagne. It's more like a very expensive, very public software failure. A spectacular, cost-cutting nightmare. He threw his hands up in exasperation. Running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, he was trapped. He couldn't fire the infrastructure, he needed the infrastructure. He couldn't cut the cost was now actively hemorrhaging funds. He had traded a manageable salary expense for an existential threat to his entire career. He turned to me, his face a mask of grudging respect, tinged with a terrifying amount of fear. "Alex," he said, the formality returning. But this time it was laced with a newfound reverence. "You are not merely an asset. You are the central nervous system. You are the reason we exist." And that was the moment the true revenge clicked. Not the initial, satisfying thunk of the access revocation, but the quiet, lingering resonance of his utter powerlessness. He hadn't just lost a good employee, he had lost the ability to function. "Exactly, Mark," I agreed, finally picking up the pen. I held it over the severance package, paused for a dramatic second, and then signed. My name, underlined, felt heavy and resolute beneath his gaze. "So, what now?" he asked, the question small, defeated. I looked back at the crimson flashing dashboard. At the digital monument to his short-sighted greed. I looked at the pristine, polished mahogany of his desk, which suddenly seemed tragically misplaced in the face of the technological chaos. "And now," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, irresistible whisper, "we start the crisis management, and you, Mark, are going to need to explain to the board why you chose to cut the one thing that kept the lights on." I slipped the signed folder back across the desk to him, the weight of the parchment suddenly feeling heavier than the entire server cluster. He picked it up, his thumb brushing against the ink on my signature. And he looked at me. In that moment, the rage was gone. What remained was absolute, perfect, vindicated satisfaction. I hadn't just been fired for being too expensive. I had proven that the price tag was a laughable, insulting fiction. The true cost of cutting me was a catastrophic, unavoidable failure. And it was all because of that humming, trapped wasp of a fluorescent light.